Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Landman and I am presenting the effects of saturated fatty acids on the occurrence of diabetes type 2. The purpose of this topic is to see if the consumption of saturated fatty acids may have an effect on diabetes type 2. First, I wanted to briefly go over what diabetes type 2 is and some background information on saturated fats. Type 2 diabetes is a metabolic disease as a result of insulin resistance, which means that although insulin is released, it cannot be used. This results in an increase of blood glucose. This state is known as hyperglycemia. Studies show that major factors that are correlated with the onset of type 2 diabetes include stress, sleep, physical activity, and diet. Saturated fatty acids mostly come from animal fats, although there are vegetable fats, including coconut oil and vegetable oil, that have considerable amounts of saturated fats as well. Saturated fatty acids have many important metabolic functions, which include protein isolation, which helps control different proteins and their physiological functions. Some saturated fatty acids are shown to function in signal transduction. They also may help convert essential fatty acids into their functional derivatives. It's important to understand that saturated fatty acids are not essential fatty acids, which means that they do not need to be consumed. Multiple studies have shown a relationship between increased diet with saturated fat and the prevalence of diabetes type 2. The two main studies I am going to be speaking about are an animal study that was done on young pigs and a human study done on obese and overweight adults. There are a few things to know about animal studies. They have been shown to contribute to life-saving cures, although they are usually cruel and inhumane. They also do not show great evidence, as human studies do, because we are a different species. This animal study shows that saturated fatty acids as well as cholesterol increase insulin resistance. For the sake of this presentation, I am going to be focusing on the effects from saturated fat. The study design used pigs that were only 3 months of age and put them into two groups, depending on the diets fed. The control diet consisted of 13% of the calories consumed from fat. The other group consisted of a high saturated fatty acid cholesterol diet, which is 44% saturated fat consumed and 2% cholesterol consumed. 10 weeks after consuming these diets, multiple tests were taken. Insulin and glucose challenges were performed on the pigs after 10 weeks, and after 12 weeks, there were samples taken of the pigs' tissues. These results showed an increased level of high-density lipoprotein as well as low-density lipoprotein cholesterol in the pigs who were fed the high saturated fat cholesterol diet. There was also an increase in insulin resistance in these pigs compared to the control group, as well as decreased insulin receptor expression in the experimental group compared to the control group. The study showed that pigs that were fed a high saturated fatty acid diet had higher insulin resistance as well as decreased insulin gene receptors that controlled insulin signaling. Because insulin signaling is a major reason for type 2 diabetes, the study gave a positive correlation between saturated fats and diabetes type 2. This human study's purpose was to see if dietary fat consumption had an association with insulin resistance. These researchers used 3 different groups, although all the participants were obese and/or overweight. Each person in the study consumed a diet that consisted of 35% fat, 12% saturated fat, and 47% carbs. This went on for 10 days. Then these participants were split into 2 diet groups. One group ate a low-fat diet, which consisted of 20% fat, 8% saturated fat, and 62% carbs. The second group ate a high-fat diet, which consisted of 55% fat, 25% saturated fat, and 27% carbs. After 4 weeks of both diets, insulin sensitivity and fat were measured in the participants. It is important to know that all of the diet groups increased saturated fat, although the amount differed. These studies showed that insulin levels increased with the highest fat diet, although it did remain the same on the low-fat diet. Subcutaneous fat also increased with insulin resistance, and the consumption of more saturated fat increased the rate of insulin resistance. This study shows that insulin resistance is a major contribution to the development of diabetes type 2 due to increased insulin resistance from a high saturated fat diet. Both the animal study and the human study show a positive correlation between an increased saturated fatty acid intake with the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, because they both showed an increase of insulin resistance due to high amounts of saturated fat. So this diagram really helps explain the mechanisms of how dietary fat may increase insulin resistance and in turn cause type 2 diabetes. This diagram shows that an excess amount of energy, which is dietary fat in this case, may result in free fatty acids, which can cause insulin resistance. Excess energy intake can also cause adipose-derived hormones, and most importantly, resistin, which is a hormone that actually increases the resistance of cells to insulin. When applying this idea to practice, it is important for dietitians and other healthcare professionals to have the most up-to-date research and education. These professionals need to be aware of the newest findings. Although it is known that saturated fat diet can lead to obesity and that insulin resistance leads to type 2 diabetes, it is important to understand the link between obesity and insulin resistance. Diabetes type 2 can come from many different factors, but if it can be controlled through one's diet, it is important to understand ways to help clients prevent it.